On this episode of That Kingsville podcast, Director of Finance Ryan McCloud and CAO of Town of Kingsville John Norton join us. We talk budget 2024.
That's some heavy hitters.
Heavy hitters. You know, they came in last year. We had a discussion at the first draft, and then we milked it for a couple episodes and went through. Not this year.
Nope.
They passed it after one day. So they join us and we talk all about some of the things, the importance. Kevin gets schooled on math a couple of times.
Math.
All that.
I was a reporter. I wasn't a mathematician.
That's fine. You read things on paper and just misunderstood.
I get maths.
It happens. So stay tuned.
It is maths.
Maths.
Grammar and budget deliberation discussion on this episode of That Kingsville podcast.
Oh, dears.
Is it beers or beer? How many beer? I had 12 beer.
I'm from up north. I'm having 24 beer.
Oh boy. Join us this episode of That Kingsville podcast. That Kingsville podcast proudly supported by Kingsville Brewery.
Beer.
Beer. Yeah, it is beer.
Having all the beer.
Beer. Do you have a beer lover in your life and need the perfect gift? Kingsville Brewery has what you're looking for with our 12 Days of Kingsmas gift pack. Pick up one today from the tap house or order online at Kingsville Brewery. And there's free delivery to Windsor and Essex residents. Also, big congratulations to the team over at Kingsville Brewery, bringing home bronze for their barrel-aged stout at the Ontario Brewing Awards this week. So congratulations to the team over there.
Couldn't come at a better time. Good stout season.
Bottoms up.
Head on down to Tap House 127 on Main Street in Kingsville and enjoy that delicious menu and have yourself a wonderful, tasty beverage from Kingsville Brewery. Thank you, Kingsville Brewery, for sponsoring That Kingsville podcast. Joining us on That Kingsville podcast, a momentous day for these two gentlemen and the rest of the administration of the municipality. Director of Financial Services, Ryan McCloud, CAO Town of Kingsville, John Norton. Thanks for joining us on the show tonight, gentlemen. Budget 2024. Momentous occasion today. It passed. First day of deliberations. You guys went through it. Congratulations.
That's right. I think we're pretty excited about getting it done. And I don't want to use that word dismissively, like as if we're just happy to get past it and move on with our lives. But now we can actually do the work and start the projects that were in the budget. And this is the first time we're going to have a full year to do that. In the past, passing it in January, we couldn't really get started until February or even March sometimes before it was approved. So, we're excited to get it done and get on with the work.
What does that do for the tender process and some of the major projects? I mean, obviously it speeds it up, but you're bidding against probably numerous other municipalities with projects. How is it going to help Town of Kingsville?
Well, the later you get your tenders out in the process, the fewer competitors are interested in the work. I don't know the exact science behind it. What's the ideal timing in terms of when you get it out? If you get it out too early, maybe vendors will sit back and, put some high prices on stuff. If you get it out too late, you just might not be a competitive market for it. So it's hard to say exactly the kind of impact it'll have, but hopefully the sooner we get it out, the more parties that are interested in it, and generally the more parties interested, the better results.
It's funny, but having you guys in today on a finalized budget kind of throws us off.
Mm-hmm. It was not the episode we'd planned.
No, because normally we would have yourselves, administration, in to talk about the budget that administration's putting forward to council, and then council in to talk about the budget that they've worked with administration to approve. So now we're going to kind of and we'll have Mayor Rogers in, probably next episode to talk about council's view on the budget and why council decided to make some of the decisions. But now we're going to be discussing really reasons why administration put forward, but also, I guess, because it sounds like from what I've heard so far, there really was not a whole lot of changes. The ultimately, if anything, there's a little bit of increase in some of the salary spending in the budget that was proposed. But in past years, I know there tends to be a lot of cuts, and it sounds like council is relatively happy with the budget that was presented this time.
Yeah, I think part of the reason it went as smoothly as it did is kind of a change in philosophy in terms of how we budget for our capital projects. We're moving towards a life cycle reserve funded strategy. So in any given year, one project doesn't have a direct impact on the tax rate. What council's really deciding is how much money they're going to put into the budget for these future projects. That's what really drives the tax rate. It's not so much specific projects in any given year. So it kind of cuts the debate out of, whether we should push a playground off this year or next year, or, buy this truck this year or next year. The money's there. It's just a matter of going ahead and doing it when it makes sense.
Yeah, discussing earlier in the year all the assets and all the facilities that need the rebuilding or repurposing or surplus determination. Those are things that were a part of your strat plan. But on this budget, there's one of them that stands out, and that's Coum. So, can you talk about how that deliberation went with your proposed budget towards the Coum facility, and any of that the details around that?
Yeah. So, as you know, last summer we had a facilities review, and council at that time agreed to proceed with a new facility in Coum. We're really excited about it. It means bringing down what are very old buildings. We've got the old school that had been purchased years and years ago, that is quite old and needing investments if we're going to keep it. And then we've got the park, what do we call it? The
field house.
The field house and the
pavilion.
Pavilion.
Yep.
And they're regularly used, but sort of at the end of their life cycle. So, it makes sense to bring them down and build something new. So on a rough level, we came up with a price tag of about $2.5 million.
It's about 2.9.
Yeah,
$2.9 million. And what Ryan did, which I think makes a lot of sense, is propose that we would pay that over 10 years. So we've, put into this year's budget an amount to pay off 1/10 of that. We'll do that every year over 10 years. We don't want to be paying for it beyond that. And we've just completed a consultation with user groups that regularly use those facilities: baseball, soccer, Rotary. We're going to be having another meeting with Scouts soon. We also had a public meeting in which we invited the public to come and speak to us about what they want, to be built there. So we're excited about that and looking forward to, maybe breaking ground, towards the second half of next year.
And that's so because I did notice, so $2.5 million long-term debt financing, and then $230,000 is actually against the tax bill for this year.
That's correct.
Yeah. And I think that we probably should talk high-level numbers and then sort of dig in.
Let's
so
cap it.
Do we want to? All right. So I'll rhyme them off. So we got, and this is as proposed. So this has a few alterations to it, but as proposed, and please fix what I ultimately get wrong. So total budget paid for through taxation to $23,875,000. $19 million-ish of that is paid for through residential taxes. So give or take, the rest is covered through farmland taxes, multi-res, commercial, all of that stuff. Municipal tax increase is actually a little bit higher than this. The municipal portion of a tax bill, the increase is 8.2%. But as always, we like to hedge that 8.2% by saying that for the average Kingsville home, which an average Kingsville home has a property assessment of $250,000, not value, property assessment. The municipal portion of that home's tax bill is $2,063, and that portion of your tax bill is going to go up $158.
That's pretty much spot on. I mean, we didn't change a lot in terms of dollar value during deliberations today. There was a little bit of movement. I think we actually ended up adding about $22,000 into the budget. So the final tax increase on the average household ended up being $158.17.
Right, and speaking on the percentage, so it is, and again, you guys are coming into a place where I think the three of us are in agreement that taxes need to go up on a regular basis. That we aren't the 0% tax people. We never have been. So taxes need to go up. 8.2% on a municipal increase is 4.4-ish% on a total tax bill. But again, that's kind of difficult to also understand because there's no county budget increases yet. So that 4.4% is sort of reality and sort of not at this point. So, but the municipal portion that council has control of is going up by 8%. Total salaries and benefits.
Just real quick, if I can, do you have any idea? Have you had any communication with the County of Essex as to what they're looking at as far as a proposed increase? Because I know they've gone in December in the past as far as their budget deliberations.
I've heard preliminary numbers in the 5 to 6% of what they're coming in at. But I don't know what, that was very rough draft, so I don't know what they're actually going to present to council.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Kev. Thank you.
No, that's okay. Total salaries and benefits for 2024, $10,791,000. That doesn't include the new positions. New positions are about 350,000-ish. That's up from 9.4 million in 2023. That is a significant increase. It's about 1.3-ish, or about 18.9% if you count in the new positions.
I think that's where I might differ with you on the math a little bit.
That's fine.
So the wage increase,
As I said,
yeah.
there will be errors.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Why we're here.
The wage increase for existing staff on the tax rate works out to about $250,000 increase. And that's basically just cost of living allowance increase for our union and non-union staff. We proposed 5 new positions in the budget. $280,000 is hitting the tax levy. 2 of the positions, the water position and the building position, are both funded through rates in their respective departments.
Okay, so then, right, there's still I'd have to go back and check the math then, because 1.3 seems like million to 200,000 seems like a fairly substantial difference. So I wonder where, which is, and that's fine. But, and this is an interesting stat that I did find. So the Amherstburg proposed budget has salaries and wages of 15.2 million. And that's up 7.63% compared to the year before. So if you want to break that number out per household, Amherstburg pays $1,574 in salaries and wages per household, where Kingsville pays $1,218 in salaries and wages per household. That's a $355 savings for the town of Kingsville per household. And to put that into perspective, the town of Kingsville, to equate to something equal to the town of Amherstburg, would need to add $3 million to their wage budget, which would be roughly about another 10% tax increase just specifically for salaries and wages. So it's there will always be complaints whenever people are being hired at a town, because everyone thinks that you see five people leaning on shovels, and that's the thing, that's the stereotype for salaries at a town, unfortunately. And but I think that when you bear it out in ways that you can compare down, it makes sense. And whether it's, a few percent or my seemingly now outrageous 18%.
Hey, math works. Anyway.
There are some.
Can I just, I don't want to keep cutting you off, but I want to touch on certain subjects while we're discussing them. So I know last time we talked budget, we did talk about staffing. We talked about identified shortages and stuff like that. The town has put in a lot of plans over the last many years, as we've discussed, as far as forecasting for the future, whether it's through reserves or vehicles, stuff like that. Have you identified a point, obviously taking into growth as a factor, where you will get to the point where you have the right amount of staff, or the amount of staff that you need? Or is that, and maybe that's not a fair question, if it isn't, please tell me, but
no, I think
the forecasts, models say that by this point we hope to have that.
Yeah, and I think the question you're asking is what the mayor and council are asking. So we're getting that question they've asked us through the strategic plan to come up with essentially a 10-year or even longer forecast for staffing levels going forward, because they have continued to see, requests for increase in staff, and they're wondering where's the sort of limit. So we're going to develop that hopefully in 2024. Where do we see the staffing levels going? I think we need to what it's likely going to show is that we need to sort of right size based on what council and what we think the community is asking for in terms of service levels. We're going to sort of right size the staff, and then once it gets right sized, then it should probably just increase on a growth trajectory that matches sort of the population growth, right? So, but the question is what is that right size number? How quickly do we need to get there? Why, do we need to get there? Why all of those questions? So lots of questions around that. But I think your point that was drawn out by Kevin is, just we have a lot less money we're putting towards staff than other communities are. And, correspondingly, we're fine with that. Like at a senior level, I'm fine with that as long as we're willing to agree then that we'll have lower levels of service. So, if we're willing to let the grass grow a little bit longer on the soccer fields, and, when the parents call and complain the grass is long, well, we get less people who cut grass than everywhere else. So, those kinds of answers tend to, I think, on a going forward basis, people aren't willing to tolerate that. They're saying, no, we want the same level of service. Well, then you have to have the same level of staffing. The grass doesn't cut itself.
Right. And sorry, the question was just simply twofold. One, to identify so people know that, hey, this is a huge or a part of the reason why the increase is what it is, that they are identifying the need. And secondly, that it is just, it's simply recognized that you're putting the money there because, you've identified it. Sorry, Kev.
No. It's all good. On the salaries, and this is kind of getting into the nitty gritty of the budget, but just out of my own curiosity, there were some points in some departments where, and IT's one that comes to mind, where, there's $100,000 increase in salaries with no attributable increase in positions. Or in other departments, there may be a significant increase in the cost of benefits with no attributable increase in the cost of salaries. What's happening in some of those? Engineering, I think, was another department where there's a significant increase in salaries, but no attributable increase in the number of people in those departments.
During the year, we did a little bit of restructuring where we created some new departments and reassigned staff to different directors and whatnot. So there's been some internal movements of staff. That's where you might see some fluctuations. Also, during last year's budget deliberations, council did approve us with a certain amount of funding for staffing and kind of left it up to administration to come back with the recommendations as to where it was added. So where that pot of funding, I think in the 2023 budget, was just kind of thrown under the CAO's budget with the kind of to be determined staffing envelope. And some of that money was used to apply to various departments. So that's another reason why you're seeing some fluctuations.
Okay.
But for the most part, it's mostly like restructuring, transferring employees to different reporting structures within the budget.
So to clarify, we hired a part-time consultant during the summer who helped us through the facilities review. So if you saw that gentleman lead some of those public meetings, and he met with a lot of user groups and then prepared a report. So that funding came from some of this money Ryan referenced that council had given us last year for sort of an open-ended staffing increase.
Right.
Then once he left, we decided to hire, I decided actually to, meeting with the senior staff, we decided to hire a full-time additional person in IT department. So that's where we've added that position. So when you see the increase come forward this year, that's because now going forward, we've assigned those funds that we were given last year to that department on a permanent basis. We've hired a full-time supervisor in that area. We've still only got 3 full-time people. We used to have 2. So, the problem with 2 is, we just had no relief for the manager. So, when the manager goes off duty, he's still sort of on duty because, when there's a problem, an IT problem, he's having to address it. So we needed some redundancy there. And that helps us dramatically also to address all of the risks we have in the IT world, as you know.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You don't know what I'm talking about?
No.
We have a lot of risks, and we only have we had a 2-member staff, and now we got 3. those are the kind of things that keep us up at night. So we wanted to kind of build up some support there and make sure that we got enough staff to at least address the risks and meet the needs of staff, so we don't have a very large IT department. I felt that was kind of grossly understaffed.
Just to add on to that, the way we deliver services has changed a lot in terms of how automated we are. When I started with the town 12 years ago, almost everybody had desk computers. When they left the office, they were done. And now people are connected, working remotely. It's as we expand parks and recreation, that type of thing, it's becoming more of a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation. So there's a lot more dependence on IT. Our guys are out in the field with their tablets and smartphones, documenting issues, entering work order responses. So there is a lot more emphasis on IT than there was 12 years ago, which is why we need more support there.
Yeah, and I don't think the point wasn't to pick on IT. It was just honestly one of the departments that came to my mind where there was a variance that didn't seem to be attributed previously. So just wondering.
That's a fair point. But just going back to, I think like I said, I've been with the town 12 years, and then probably the first 6 or 7 years, we hired almost nobody. So there was quite a big backlog of needs before John came to the town. And I think that council was so sensitive of the year-to-year tax rate setting budget that they probably weren't thinking as strategically as they should have. Instead, focusing on the year-to-year, keeping the tax rate as low as possible. And so, we didn't have an HR manager. We didn't have a communications person. We didn't have a lot of these positions that we have now. It's hard to fathom how we even functioned without them, right? So I think hopefully the residents are seeing a step up in service for the bodies we are adding and the costs that go with it.
On the expense side, what are some of the other highlights and we'll get to capital in a second, but sticking with operations, what are some of the other highlights that are in the budget?
Well, some of the things that are kind of outside our control is insurance costs. They're up almost $100,000 over last year's budget. Our OMPF funding, that's a transfer payment we received from the province, that's down $90,000. And then we also just have growth-related costs. Things like policing costs and garbage collection, that's all based on per household. So as the town grows, those costs increase. And then just general inflation beyond that.
Oh, that wonderful. It's like the word for everything. I was like, I bought a bag of chips. Inflation. There's no chips in the bag. It's becoming more and more acceptable when you have to deal with increase in costs that are unexpected. Mm-hmm. And it's the way that it's presented and the way that it's communicated, and that I think allows the layperson to understand the value behind why the additional expense happens. So, I'm sure that when the numbers actually reach the people, they'll, how much of this is inflationary? Like, have you calculated at all a little bit about what it would be given inflationary addition to the overall impact?
I guess I don't have a firm number on what that inflation impact is, just because there's so many moving pieces. I will say we're somewhat shielded from it because such a big part of our operating budget is labor costs, and about half our workforce is unionized, and they're all under collective agreements. And depending on how your perspective, we entered these collective agreements before we entered this rapidly inflationary period. But, so we may be feeling the effects of it, a couple years down the road when the contract comes up for renewal.
Precisely. And with the Unifor contracts in the auto sector and a few others that are really now setting the standard for where contract negotiations go, are there considerations in your budgetary creation in order to offset, much like you're doing with the facilities for the future? How do we anticipate these additional costs coming at contract renewal?
Yeah, so I think our union contract comes up for renewal at the end of 2025, maybe 2026. Do you know if it's the end of 25 or the end of 26? I don't remember off. It's one of those. So we've been kind of, as Ryan said, we've been kind of shielded from that. They had agreed to, more modest increases back when times were less inflationary. So now we look ahead to that without, a little bit worried. I can't say that we've budgeted for that. That's not in this budget. So it's something we're going to have to contend with as we go forward. Sure. On the non-union side, however, we see that where, we again have built in only modest increases. And, we've had a lot of staff turnover, and I think the times are gone when municipalities would attract, just like in all sectors, we would attract an employee. They would come in their 20s and they'd stay until they retire. Now employees are willing to jump for a few $1,000s more to switch to a different municipality. So we've got to stay competitive in that.
Sure.
That way.
Which comes back around to the point as if you want to continue the levels of services that you've promoted and encouraged, that you're changing the culture around the administration. These are factors that you need to accommodate in order to retain, because, it's no secret we've had some departures in some key positions over the last few months that it's going to be difficult to backfill without considering what market value is for those positions, because you're competing against how many municipalities do we have in this immediate vicinity?
Well, there's seven in the county of Essex.
Right. So
what's the city? And then, it's not that far to go to Chatham-Kent and other municipalities there. So
yeah, but nobody wants to do that. Oh, sorry, John. Sorry. It's Kent County. Okay, it's over there. But
that's why John came here.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
So these are things that you're going to have to face. How do you, as the CAO, what kind of discussions do you have with council through any kind of budgetary discussions about, hey, if we want to continue to be a great community, on the non-union side, these are things that we need to embrace as the new reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And salary isn't the only thing. One of our problems at Town Hall is that we're bursting at the seams. So I've got staff now, just 5 years ago, an office that held one person now holds three. So I would love if anyone from the public, wants to post on social media that that's not true. They're welcome to come. I'll give you a tour.
Oh no, it's true.
So we've got staff. I've got to mention, for example, the IT department. We've got staff in the IT. I said we only have 3 employees. 2 of them share an office. There's no window. It used to be an office for 1. That's not a great working environment. So you multiply that, salaries, everything else. They do get to work with Ryan and I, so there's the bonus side.
Hey,
but that only goes so far. And people are saying, we want good working environment, and to try to attract and retain staff is difficult. It's no secret we've lost our director of legal services. We've lost our manager of planning. I can tell you we've posted a few positions since those people have left at the sort of union level or at the lower non-union level. It's much easier to recruit at those levels. But in those 2 senior positions, I can tell you right now, we've not recruited anyone. We're really receiving no applications. Mm-hmm. Kingsville's a little off the beaten path. I talked to a lawyer just over the weekend. I'm trying to recruit all weekend. That's when I tend to try to do my recruitments, trying to find people. I had someone reach out and say, hey, Kingsville, I'm interested. I see you posted for a lawyer position. I'm in the GTA. I might be willing to come your way. And then when they found out Kingsville was in Kingston, they were like, oh, that's where Kingsville is. No, I don't want to go. So they backed out.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And this is how, so how far do I go with that, right? How long do we spend recruiting? Or how long do we then say we've got to kind of switch gears, and how do we fill those needs in a different way?
I appreciate the candor on that.
Well, and to the office space, and
no,
and
that's what I mean. No, that's just it. Like there's no sugarcoating there, and that's what I appreciate that. And this is the reality that we're facing,
and that's because of you face so many naysayers about the expense at employment, right? And they can't have it both ways, where they complain about the levels of services and then they don't want to pay for it. Right. And if we're concerned about the town of Kingsville and we want to make sure that we're being the best town that we can, it costs money. It comes at an expense. So there has to be that acceptance of, if you want to be much like sports teams, right? Like, you want to be a contender, you got to pay. You get what you pay for in certain respects. Not to say that your staff is under valued or whatnot, but if we want to attract talent, it comes at a cost. And, I'm basing this line of discussion off of some comments that were made about, how many individuals were employed at the town and how much it costs and whatnot. And the stigma versus what the reality is, it just doesn't equate. So thank you for...
We're not any different than the private sector in terms of what you're experiencing in the labor market. We get these comments sometimes from council or the public say, why don't you just hire a part-time person? Even if we're lucky enough to find a great part-time person, the chances of them staying is so slim and remote that, you're constantly have a revolving door of people. You're constantly training, and the strain that puts on your supervisors and managers, because you're trying to, get that person up to speed. So it's just a competitive labor market. We've even had people hired into the union that have left to go back to private sector because private sector wages have changed so much in the last few years.
Yeah. The new positions. So what? Where are the new positions, and what extra services are they going to be providing?
Yeah. So the first position that was approved was a firefighter / inspector / training officer. There's just a lot of demands in terms of training our volunteer force, so they need to add resources there, and then also to help respond to daytime calls. We're really struggling to get volunteers to answer the call for those daytime shifts. We've had a lot of retirees in the last few years, so sometimes on daytime calls we're only getting a couple volunteers to show up, and then our fire inspector or training officer, they got to hop on the truck and answer the call. So we're trying to add to that daytime firefighting force.
Can I just jump in there? I'm trying to do everything I can. I think we need to do everything we can to protect, preserve, encourage our volunteer fire sector. Communities that have had to go to a full-time firefighting service have seen costs dramatically go up. Full-time firefighters get paid a lot of money. It's very, very expensive. So we get a huge value from our volunteer firefighters. They provide an invaluable service at very cost-effective. The challenge going forward, and our fire chief alluded to this a little bit this morning when he was asked these questions, is, we're seeing a shift. Volunteer firefighters, again, they used to join and they would stay with us for 20 or 30 years. We're now seeing volunteer firefighters get recruited and they'll only stay maybe 3, 4, 5 years. And then, we have to shake their hand if they want to leave because their family circumstances have changed. The burden is just too much. Thanks for your 5 years of service. But there's an impact on us because we're seeing that turnover happen more quickly. Also, the province has imposed on us just in the last 2 years mandatory training for volunteer firefighters. So that has had a tremendous impact on our ability to both recruit firefighters who are willing to go through all of that training because they didn't have to used to train at that level, and also on our staff to provide that level of training. So it's just had a huge impact. I'm worried we're going to see the end of the volunteer fire sector as we've known it in rural parts of Ontario. We're not immune to that change, and we have to kind of do everything we can to preserve it. So that's what we're working to do. We need to add some full-time staff. We asked council to support this additional position that will help provide training, do inspections, and be available for daytime calls.
And that's the reason for the extra $60,000 in training too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And maybe it's worth having, inviting Chief Suture to come on to talk a little bit more and
I think you should
pump the tires. I know when he was first hired early this year, January, I believe he started. Yeah. We had a brief chat, and I think he'd be willing to come on.
Yes, we did.
No, truthfully, just to kind of highlight to the, I covered the fire department for a number of years with the paper, and the teamwork, and I remember the average term or lifespan for lifespan's the wrong term.
Duration of volunteer.
Sure, sounds good. Was 7 years at the time across the province, and we had guys 15, 20, 25, 30. We had some 30-year guys at the time. So, and it has changed. And I do wonder if that has gone from 7 to 4 or 5. But definitely if there's anything else you can share to pump the tires right now with the fire department, please, I'll give you the floor for a couple of minutes. But yeah, we can definitely invite Jason on to come on and talk about what's needed and what's involved and what the commitment is and the rewards ultimately.
Well, I'm worried about it. This is the kind of stuff that keeps you up at night is, if people dial 911, the call comes out on dispatch. I get the emails saying that the call has come out in dispatch, and we're waiting for people to respond. We're waiting for people to get out of their beds if it's the middle of the night, or we're waiting for them to leave their jobs. And, they have to drive to the fire hall, they have to get the fire truck, they have to get their equipment, and off they go. It's a phenomenal service. It's obviously, none of us would ever, you can't find superlatives high enough, right, to describe the service they do. When our loved one is trapped in a car and they need help right now, these are people who are going. So we thank them, but we need bodies, right? And we need to support that fire service. So I just hope the community rallies around them and supports them. But we also need full-time staff in that department as well, who are capable and qualified to provide the training and fill in the gaps where needed. So thank you for letting me speak to it. Yeah.
And then new building inspector as well.
Yeah. Even though our permitting is down a little bit for this year, the amount of inspections is incredibly high, just because a lot of the permits that they're now inspecting or builds they're inspecting are based on permits that were issued in 2022. And so there's we have a couple big builds going on at the school, the condos. We know we have a lot of plans of subdivisions kind of in the pipeline, and there is a big backlog in the building department. And I know builders are getting frustrated by our turnaround time, response time. So, for me, now that I oversee economic development, it's incredibly frustrating to hear that, we have people that wanting to build and invest in the community, but we can't get the permits out or we can't get the inspections done. So to me, that's a very high priority area in terms of getting that properly staffed. But like a lot of other positions, there's not a lot of just skilled building inspectors sitting around. So it's going to take a while to train people up to do that job to the level that we're hoping for.
There'd be some people that say it's okay if you're delaying some of those permits.
in certain locations of the town of Kingsville.
Certain locations
for
in the town of
developments,
Kingsville.
that are
For
proposed.
specific multi-residential developments.
Main Street.
Other new positions. Programming. There's new programs and events, and then some new students there as well, right?
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, we added a programming and events coordinator. I don't know what the exact name of the position is. Some of the duties are still to kind of be determined, but there's definitely a need in terms of supporting the programming that we do have and the events that we do have, and then also helping to help out on the kind of the facility rental side of our business. John, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, just to say that if, I know at the beginning we were talking about how council passed the budget one day and that might have been unusual. Council grilled us, though, today on these positions. We went into closed session. We talked about staffing in terms of how this might connect to, identifiable current employees, how we're going to fill those positions. They certainly grilled me on, staff morale and whether these positions are needed, those kinds of things. Then we came out into open session, and you'll be able to watch that video and see motions were made and discussions about these positions. In particular, I would say the most discussion was probably around this programming position. And the deputy mayor made a motion that we ensure that this position sort of is half-time focused on an increase for programming or supporting current existing programs, but also focused on helping us develop policies and implement better processes for our recreation facilities. And we know that some people experience frustration when they're trying to book facilities. It's still not clear, what purpose and what is the purpose of some of our facilities? You think about the Grovedale. Council's directed us to go ahead and do a review on what is the Grovedale? What are we going to use it for? What plan do we have? So this position, will free up some staff time to be able to help focus on that.
Well, and not to pick on the Grovedale, but it's budgeted to lose about $40,000 to $50,000 in this budget based on expenses to anticipated rental, and that's considering budgeted anticipated rental, not the $3,000 actual rental that the Grovedale received during 2023. Because then it would be an almost like $100,000 loss that the Grovedale would incur.
During a strategic plan, we talked about the building quite a bit, and the direction from council was very much that they want to be community use, and they want to be to support arts and culture and nonprofit events, rather than the alternative is we turn it into a private venue for private rentals, which is probably a little bit better on the business side of things, but much less of a community asset. Council made it pretty clear to us that they want it to be used for community services and programming, that type of thing.
And that's a fair point. And I mean, it's no secret we haven't exactly been kind to that building on the podcast. And we've questioned obviously certain things. I remember a few years ago with the arena, with the canteen, it was operated by the town, and every year it was sort of losing money. And then I think it was Councillor Peterson at the time said, why don't we tender this out, put it to the private sector? And they did. And somebody came in, rented it, and so on and so forth. Does it get to a point, if the numbers keep coming like this, and I don't want to say like forecast 2 or 3 years down the road, but where you have to look at it from an administration standpoint and say, we can't do this. We cannot operate this building like this. Or do you look at it and say, okay, we can do this as per council's wishes, but we have to offset that loss by either raising fees for other rentals or finding that revenue in another way throughout the community?
Well, I think it comes down to just, what is our reason for being as the municipality? If we were a private business, it would be a lot easier in a lot of ways. We are trying to please a lot of stakeholders. And during our last fees and charges review, council approved fees across the board for lower fees for the nonprofit groups. That's going to have an impact on our revenue. They've made it pretty clear that they want the facilities used, and they aren't too concerned with the revenue that's generated from them, as long as it's providing that kind of intrinsic value to the community.
And I think that when these conversations happen, then that needs to be part of the framing of the conversation. Then that, the Grovedale is maybe it was originally pitched as being a money maker for the town, is not a money maker, but not everything in the town needs to be. It's not that. It's probably better if it's not, because then you're not competing against private business that are trying to do the exact same thing that the town at one point was trying to do. There's a couple more hires, so that's 3.
So we haven't touched on the parks employee. We're going to be adding a staff member into our parks department. Just kind of increase the levels of service that people experience in the parks. And then we're also adding a water compliance officer.
Compliance officer, yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to make sure that we're meeting all of our mandatory state testing and safety checks and whatnot with the water distribution system.
And that employee is paid for through water rates, right?
Correct.
So and on water rates, and we'll go to capital in a sec, but because I'm a budget nerd, on the water rates, the new Union Water business case had significant impacts on revenues, where the revenues, if you look at water and wastewater, actually dropped by $7 million. But that's not actually a loss, right? Am I understanding that properly?
Correct. Under the old model, we were buying the water from Union Water, and then we were selling all of the water to the end customer. Under the new model, it's almost like Union Water has a relationship directly with the customer, and we have a relationship directly with the customer. So it doesn't change a lot in terms of the bottom line, but I agree the top level of revenue looks a lot different than it did a year ago.
So now it's not like there's any budget impacts. It's just ultimately that money is just elsewhere in a different set of books, and the expenses are still the same.
Correct. Yeah.
If I can say, Kevin, you were asking about staff. So we asked for and got approved for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new positions. We should note none of them are managers or directors. So, contrary to the rumor mill that we're always adding to the top end, right? So
I did see a comment on a post today that the town had added 3 times the number of managers, which
right. So
I chuckled at. But
five new staff. None of them are managers or directors. And out of those 5, 3 will hit the tax base. Right. So 1 is paid for by water rates. The building and bylaw officer will be paid for by building permit fees. The other 3 hit the tax base. So I think that's not a large request given the size of the municipality. And I will say, we did report to council. There's also a list that didn't make it into the budget of staffing requests that I wasn't agreeable to go forward with to council. That number is around 25 staff. So, I may have said, bring forward to council these 5 positions, but we said no to another 25. A lot of those might be part-time or students though, but there's still a handful of full-time staff requests in there. And I would say that each one of those is a valid request as well, right? Trying to meet a need, trying to fill a gap to bring us more in line to what other communities have. But we know we can't ask for everything all at once. So we've got to be measured and ask for the highest request.
And then is that all the new full-time? Because there was some changes.
Oh, that does just reminded me. We did initially we added a part-time position under boarding, lodging, and rooming housing
in the clerk's department.
In the clerk's department for that licensing. During budget deliberations, they agreed to make that a full-time position, with the anticipation that we're also going to be licensing short-term rental properties in the future. And council anticipates an offsetting amount of revenue from the licensing to fund that position. So that position was added, but under the the idea that we're going to have an equal amount of revenue offsetting that.
And then there is a couple new students in the programming and events department, but it looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a reallocation of students from parks, right?
Yes.
The anything else you guys want to talk about?
No, you got to go to Capital because
Capital.
we're running out of time, Kev.
Oh, come on. I love this episode.
Yeah, well, we got a hard stop tonight.
All right.
Capital.
Steve, you want to do capital? Here's a list that you can run through if you want.
Where am I looking here? Here's the big stuff. Okay.
It's the big stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
the sexy stuff for me is always like, okay, these are the road projects that are going to get done. This is the repaving. Like that's, and part of it is simply because it's disruptive, right? We all know how much of a headache Road 2 has been for the last 3 years, right? No, but I'm not picking on Road 2. I'm saying though, for accessibility.
Yeah.
So if even if it's for 2 months, if my road is if I'm gonna have limited access to my driveway, I want to know, and that's why, that's why these projects always come to the forefront for me in my mind. That okay, our job is to get out to the residents to say, hey, you know what? They're repaving McCallum and Augustine this year. I don't know if they are. They're probably not, but I'm just using those as examples. So I'll give you gentlemen the floor again. If we can highlight some of the
IT, 86 grand.
I'm not worried about IT capital.
Fire department, 352, but 200 of that's carryover for the EMS retrofit from last year's budget.
Okay, I guess if we're on fire, if any truck as in life cycles or anything like that, or we
defrib.
Nothing too significant on the fire department. I'll kind of jump ahead to the public works budget. I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Steve.
Good stuff.
So there's going to be a little bit of work left to finish off Road 2 next year.
Sure.
We do have, I think they just finished the base asphalt all the way to Division
Yes.
the other day, so it should be open to travel through the winter. And
I feel like I have to ask, John, can we please just address why has it taken the same amount of time to rebuild Road 2 that it took to build a portion of Highway 3?
Or the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, like what? Why?
Don't ask him that.
I know this isn't a budget question, but what is going on?
Yeah, I think the answer at a really high level is that we're building a giant water line underneath the road, and that's what people are forgetting. So most of the work and most of the time has been to build this water line underground. I've talked to some of the staff who've been able to see it, like physically go and look at it, and they're saying this is like a once in a career type size water line. This is to bring water all the way from the water treatment plant. Remember, from the water treatment plant all the way to the west end, so that we can allow development happen on the west end of Kingsville. It's a tremendous sized pipe. Getting it built, digging the hole, building the line, pressurizing it, testing it, filling it with water. That's what takes all the time. Then, the actual road work that goes on that we all care about on the surface level that you drive on, much less time consuming. So that's always why some roads seem to take much longer. It's because of the underground infrastructure.
Okay. I was always told size didn't matter, but
Wow.
How you use it?
So
what?
It's clean.
Just
Open to the imagination. All right,
More
Ryan.
projects.
Okay.
Go.
Just laying some pipe.
You've got
Time.
9 minutes to get
Time.
us through these.
And I think the point now is that the water line is there. We're going to be done in the spring, right? We're just putting on a top coat so people can drive on. And as soon as the spring comes, they're going to put on that final shiny coat, and away we go. We're done.
I'd also probably encourage the OPP to patrol it because it turned into like a drag strip the other day. Anyway, moving on.
well, they doubled Highway 3 and the speed limit went from 95 to
300.
120. Anyway.
Yeah.
alrighty.
More projects.
We're continuing to engineer and acquire land for the West Side Collector Road. So residents won't see a lot happening this year, but there's work going on behind the scenes.
Okay.
There's a couple bridge projects that are underway. Bridge on Road 11. I don't know if you guys do a lot of casual driving down Road 11, but I'm sure it's very disruptive to the people that live in that area.
Sure.
And that was actually slated for the one bridge on Road 11 was slated for completion this year, but because of the way it was going to time up with the tendering in terms of the farm season and the school buses, it was postponed to 2024 to help accommodate the needs of the residents. We're planning to add a right-hand turn lane off Main Street onto Jasperson. So this should help improve traffic flow on Main Street by getting people from the liquor store into down Jefferson, that much easier.
In front of Libero.
And
That one's county funded.
it is funded. A portion of it's funded. About a little less than half is funded through the county. We're doing some resurfacing on Graham Side Road. We're doing a bridge on Road 5 West, but at the same time, the county will be doing a bridge that crosses Division. Probably not at the exact same time, but that's definitely going to impact residents in our community when Division Road is closed for a period of time. There's a bunch of rural roads. They're all listed in the budget in terms of, resurfacing those. The lifespan of a township road is about every 10 years. So it's a lot of work that goes into resurfacing those.
A few biggies, $2.7 million for drainage reports in there. Not really spelled out, but that's municipal portion for farm drains, I would assume.
The $2.7 million is the total cost. A big chunk of that's paid for by the benefiting landowners, which is the farmers. That's not something we included in the capital schedule before. It was kind of something we just kind of buried the municipal portion in the operating budget. But we're trying to show to council all this work that's going on in the community, so when they hear from residents, they can kind of at least get a better sense of what it is we're doing.
$425 for a new condenser and repairs of the roof at the arena. $375,000 for soccer and baseball diamond upgrades. That's includes a washroom upgrade there too, right? To fix some of the issues with the septic system there.
That has been included in the budget, yes. And as well as the lights at one of the baseball fields.
$150,000 to renovate council chambers, to move the building department in there. So that addresses some of the office space issues that you were talking about, John. And we $200,000 in parks fleet. And actually, I did have a question on this one, and I did look up BPS guidelines because I was wondering how you could specifically spell out the make and model of an item that you're budgeting for without, and maybe that work has already happened, because I thought it was interesting that it wasn't that you're asking for a new pickup truck for parks, you're asking for a Ford F-150, or you're asking for a Coyote instead of asking for a tractor. Are those specific? That work's been done?
No, I think that what the confusion is, we're identifying what we're replacing.
Okay.
Not necessarily. So that Ford F-150 might be replaced with a Dodge or a GM. It depends on what the lowest tender comes in at.
I will add
as
as well, we do have more freedom than other organizations in the public sector. For example, we don't have to follow the BPS, so we're allowed to create our own purchasing policy. Yes,
I did not, because you are provincially funded.
Right. So, well, I guess because we're in a sense self-funded by taxpayers, we don't quite receive, so we are, the BPS exempts us from, the Municipal Act requires us to create our own procurement policy.
Okay. So
what we have is a policy, usually where we procure on vehicles is if we're looking for specific specifications, obviously. We are working with other municipalities to try to do sort of joint purchasing. And obviously, most recently, we've had difficulty actually acquiring vehicles because of supply chain issues.
Just like everyone that orders a vehicle and then sits and waits for 6 months.
Well, that's over now.
Is it?
I'm your correspondent from the automotive industry. Problem solved. Buy away, folks. Interest rates, what are those?
One more I had on my list anyways. $200,000 for replacement. We talked about this a little bit before we started recording. $200,000 to replace the Lakeside Park playground. That's going to be funded through reserves. $200,000 sounds like a lot, but and we talked about this already, but in my view, actually might be a little underfunded. $200,000 is basically your standard neighborhood park. So it'd be replacing what's in Lakeside Park right now with something that's pretty much what you would see, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Applewood Park, the one over off Conservation, Palmer, Millbrook.
I don't know exactly, but I think a Kingsville podcast fundraiser to supplement, build a bigger playground. That'd be welcome.
There we go.
We're going to aim our efforts towards the new school, but that's okay.
We are?
What? No, I was just... we got
news.
Do we have that much pull?
News. No, we have zero pull.
I don't know whether we're building what we have there identical, like in terms of scope or size.
Yeah, this is definitely a little bit more than we would budget for the typical neighborhood park. But like I said earlier, if we're not happy with the results we get back from the tenders, we do have some reserve funds we can draw from to supplement the budget, add features to the playground equipment. Certainly, some of this stuff is buildable. You can build it out in components. Not everything is attached to one unit, so we can add to the park in future years if we need to, or even add to this budget before we break ground if we're not happy with the tender results we receive.
I would suggest that lighting be involved in that, because it does get quite dark up at the park, and the poor kids, rack their head on, crossbars or whatever have you. It's a little dark. Yeah, you just
a little dark.
Yeah.
Anything else in capital? I think that's kind of
that's it.
The who's who.
That's the stuff. That's the nuts and bolts.
Couple, because I'm a budget nerd. Couple of things. Reserves, sort of the bank account, the savings account for the town. There's a bit of a drawdown again this year of about $3 million. That's sort of offsetting some expenses. There was a drawdown again. That's the second year in a row. There was a drawdown last year as well, around $3 or $4 million, I believe. And then I did have one question. Again, and I'm sure there's a very good answer. I don't understand how this works. So the actual year to date to the amount that was budgeted for and taxes collected for last year is about a $17 million difference. Now, I'm sure that some of that is a matter of we're not at the end of the year yet. So there's still expenses to come in based on fiscal. But if you look at the difference between the year to date expenses at the operating side and at the capital side, there's about a $17 million surplus. So I'm just wondering what happens to that, because the taxes would have been collected based on budget. So then if that money is not spent, where does it go?
I guess I'd have to really sit down with you and go through your numbers to see where you're seeing the $17 million surplus.
So if you look at so if you just look at the face sheet and you look at the 2023 budget and then 2023 actuals totals, there between the two, if you add up the differences, there's about, give or take, 17 million.
In terms on the operating side, so I'm looking at this right now, it looks like we still have about $4 million on the operating side to spend over these remaining couple months of the year. We did have a couple good news stories on the revenue front in terms of interest income for the year and supplemental tax revenue. Those are two items that are difficult for us to predict what they're going to be at the outset of the year. But then on the capital side, I would say we've probably had some unforeseen additional expenses. And all I can say is that, a lot of the numbers aren't final, so I wouldn't draw conclusions from them yet. But, we had about $240,000 worth of storms, money that we had to spend on storm cleanup that we had to respond to this year between the three kind of major storms. And there's some bills still coming in for that. So I'm optimistic as things kind of shake out that, the kind of the good news on the revenue side is going to offset those additional expenses. I would say that we're probably heading towards kind of a modest surplus at the end of the year, but it's still kind of too early to tell. There's still a lot of bills yet to come in.
And then what would happen to that surplus?
Typically, I report the surplus after the audit's complete, and which is usually around May. And we go to council, we report what the surplus for budget purposes versus what is reported in the financial statements, because it's kind of two different methods of accounting. And it's a little bit complicated, but we try to walk council through the differences. But in terms of the budget surplus, we then administration will propose kind of a project or reserve fund to put that money towards. And if you look at a deferred capital list, there's millions of dollars of deferred capital projects that we're not putting in this budget. There's a number of strategic priority projects that we know that is on council's radar. Probably the biggest one being the acquisition and development of school properties. Over the last few years, we put a lot of kind of our surplus money towards that. I imagine we'll do something like that when the time comes.
And then normally that would show up then, say it's decided to put it as a reserve contribution, then that would show up in the next budget as an addition to the reserves. So like, for instance, that didn't happen last year because there was a drawdown in reserves.
Well, last year we actually, we had a surplus and we ended up applying it to the arena project. A good chunk of that arena project was supposed to be debt financed, but the tenders came in a little less than we had budgeted, and we had this surplus at the end of the year. So we're able to offset whatever we were going to debt finance on that project with the surplus.
Okay.
That's some fiscal responsibility,
Look at
Mr. McCloud.
Yeah. And it's- I know a lot of people like to spend like found money on
No.
something new, right? Like if the accountant wants to spend it on the bills that you
Well, right.
you have, yeah.
And again, being fiscally prudent, I would rather you do that because I don't want to pay for it because we got other bigger things to pay for, right?
That's right.
So, all right, gentlemen. Again, second year in a row. Thank you very much for coming in. I know, the pretense of what we were going to discuss changed because, again, congratulations getting the budget passed after the first day of deliberations. That's, monumental. And here you go. So let's start those tenders. Let's get Road 2 done and then move on to bigger and better things. So thanks again for joining us on the podcast.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So again, thanks to Ryan and John for coming in. Want to make this clear after in between when they left and now, Kev, you went over those numbers. That 17 million appears to not be realistic.
Well, yeah. So there is some questions on the expense portion, which is about a $5 million surplus. But that on the expense side, there still needs to be bills to come in over
Right.
the last 2 months to be paid. So that could offset. I did have the capital wrong, which is important. So I had, and if you look at the budget, it's a mistake that if you don't understand the way that capital is paid for, you would probably make the same mistake. So it looks like there's a $12 million surplus in taxation there. However, a lot of the projects that it says that were budgeted for and not paid for are not funded through tax dollars, so it's not a true surplus because you're not going to pull money, as Ryan said, you're not going to pull money out of reserves to pay for a capital project you don't do.
And a typical surplus that they stated was, under 500,000 per year,
Right.
is usually the top end of where that surplus is because they've done the homework regarding what all the expenses are in budget determination and whatnot. So
Yeah, and it did sound like there could be some addition, like it could be a bit higher this year than normal, because there could be some savings in salary because of some vacant positions. Also, they earned a bit extra in interest that they weren't anticipating, because it's difficult to kind of budget
Forecast
for that properly. So it'll be interesting to see, as Ryan said, after the audited financial statements come out, we'll find out about that surplus in about May.
and scene. There's budget.
That's
2024. Man, we milked this last year. Like for what, 2 or 3 episodes?
At least 3.
What are we gonna talk about?
Well, we still do need to talk to Mayor Rogers about some of the council's thoughts on it. I mean, we understand, and there are two. So that's the thing, right? The council is kind of like your parents.
Oh yeah.
And so administration goes and asks for their allowance, and council says yes or no.
Yeah.
So administration explained to us why they asked for the allowance that they asked for, and now we'll talk to Mayor Rogers to explain to us, why the parents said yes.
Yep. And if there was any other concerns that maybe we just didn't discuss because it wasn't, discussed. We only had so much time. Oh.
There'll be school news.
Oh, there will be school news. I know somebody got appointed to the school naming committee.
Committee Steve.
Yeah, Committee Steve.
Oh, there's only one committee person.
Yeah, former committee person. Yeah, no more. Well, there's plenty of things that happen in recent committee of the whole and town council meetings that we'll have to say for another episode as well.
There's been so much.
There's
the
been a
last
lot.
little bit, yeah.
And it's rather unfortunate that some of us have been under the weather. I think it rotated through a couple of us here and whatnot. So
Yeah,
the parade was the last time we all got together, and that was it was a great parade.
It's a great parade.
really well done.
Another great event.
Can I just pat myself on the back for the 5 p.m. start? Like, I honestly,
You need to.
how fantastic was it having the earlier start?
I don't know, Kev, if you were there the first year that it was at 5 p.m., you would have probably, done this a year ago. Yeah, no, I agree.
I'm taking my victory lap now.
Hey, I agree.
Wow.
We were wrong. You were right. With it being dusk as that parade starts rolling down Main Street, and by the time it hits us right at the Four Corners, it is, plenty. You see all the lights, you see all the decorations.
magical.
It is magical. But yeah, no, it was another great event by the town of Kingsville. Well received. I think some people listened to us because we did see an uptick in some of the subscribership.
Love that.
So always a good benefit. We're very thankful, and we want to shout out Miller's Bakery because
I'm glad you mentioned that because I wanted to give props to Holly for coming up the stairs.
Well, it was fantastic. So as they were walking down the street in the parade, she ran up the stairs at the Grove Hotel and gave us our gingerbread cookies.
Yes.
To the podcast staff.
Thank you, Holly Miller.
So thank you.
And that's some impressive cardio.
It was like to walk all the way from what Jasper? No, it was Weigel and Maine,
and do a quick lap up the Grove, and then
all the way down to the park.
Wow,
you're getting your steps in that day. But yeah, no, another great event. Hopefully, the New Year's Eve event with the fireworks and whatnot that they've started advertising this year, and all the other park-related events are also well received.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up New Year's Eve, and I wasn't going to touch on it, but you did mention it. We've discussed it, and I had some concerns. And before I came on to just sort of rant my concerns, I contacted Councillor Tony Gaffin, and we had a really good conversation about it all. And while I still don't necessarily agree wholly with the timing of the event, I understand it. I understand it better now, and as to why they're doing it and the rationale behind it. I do have concerns still, but I feel a lot more comfortable about it. So thanks to Tony for his time.
I like it. I think it's great. I think it's a great idea. I hope it goes off well.
I also like the clarification that the fireworks are not at midnight.
Right. No, and one of the concerns I had, and it was minor, and Tony kind of cleared this up, but the town of Kingsville and the unionized workers, and credit to them, have New Year's Eve and Christmas Eve as holidays. So one of my questions to Tony was, what are we paying employees to work New Year's Eve? Somewhat unnecessarily. They have it in their contract, and good for them that it's a holiday. So were we paying them time and a half? Were we paying them double time? And he wasn't sure as to what they were being paid, and he was willing to find out for me. But I said, no, it's not necessary, because what he told me was that the cost of the fireworks is offset by sponsorship. So are a lot of the other events. So even if it's 2 or 3 employees, the cost is minimal. And I paused for a moment, and I thought, you know what, he's right. So it kind of became a moot point for me. So
we'll see in a couple of weeks what that event actually materializes as, and we can criticize and or rave and rant about it.
Well, and I don't think there will be any criticisms from me at this point, because like you said, it's one more way that they're trying to bring the community together. And
you just opened Panda.
Hey, look.
But they got rid of another event, Steve.
Are we going to complain about? I really don't want to get into complaining about the naming of.
No, not the naming of, the format of.
I'm fine with it.
I'm not.
I like it.
Sorry,
Open Streets is gone.
Streets.
Oh, okay. I wasn't even going to touch that tonight.
They aren't going to close the streets and call it Open Streets anymore.
But not in the same area.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
I'm not.
Okay, let's save this one.
Oh,
Now we have reason to go again in 2 weeks. And
thanks for joining us on that
Christmas.
Kingsville podcast. My name is Dave. That's Kevin. That's Steve. Please like and subscribe. Thanks everyone who's commented on our social medias. We do read it.
We don't always agree, but we do read it.
We do read it, and it's fun and it's entertaining. Steve doesn't have Facebook, so he doesn't know about anything.
Yeah, Steve doesn't.
It's probably a good thing.
Steve doesn't know.
Probably a good thing. So. Gary, thanks again for production. Always a pleasure. All right. Tune in next time when we, get in a heated debate about open streets, because Kevin and I, we're going to come to blows at this.
Can't wait for the block party. Love the block party. Can't wait.
Thanks for watching.
I'll be there.
Totally.